focus on discernment in spiritual awakening. As we continue to elevate in consciousness, we are noticing that the third dimensional framework that many of us were raised into is now dissolving. Overall, this is a very positive thing, and yet it means that new rules are going to be applied to the reality that we exist in. And this means that discernment is more important than ever. The practice of discernment is being able to hold a balanced approach to information that is presented to you as truth. To be able to assess whether or not this information truly resonates by tapping into the language of your heart and your spirit. This means going beyond what someone or some being says is true or says is right, and truly tapping into the language of your soul to know if this information or this action is right for you. Discernment is a whole new territory for us at this time as a collective, because we are moving out of the age of Pisces, which has been the age of religion. This has been a time when we have been raised to believe that some greater authority was able to determine what was right and wrong for us. And as long as we followed these rules around what was right or wrong, then we would be okay. So this is being replaced now with, instead of focusing on and following a particular religion, we're going to notice that we will align more with universal laws. And a lot of these universal laws are not based upon judgments of right or wrong, but they're based upon this concept of one and tapping into the all, connecting with non-duality, connecting with universal consciousness. And so in order to do this, we will need to practice discernment, because there's going to be many consciousness traps along the way as we continue our ascension journey, which will have us to want to play into games of victim, victimizer, master slave programming, etc. And I have other videos on my channel and meditations to specifically detach from the consciousness trap of victim, victimizer programming, if that's something you're interested in learning more about. But today, I want to talk about something that I get a lot of questions about. So you get on this journey, and as you begin to awaken and as you begin to see past the illusions of the false matrix, something that will happen at some point is this idea that beings are out to get you, right? And that you are being attacked. You're being attacked either through black magic spells, intergenerational curses, the archons, different stuff like that is going to come up in terms of like you being attacked. And in certain ways, this is a truth. But I want to peel below the surface, because if we just kind of focus on the fact that you might feel like you're being attacked, then it does do this thing to disempower you, and it gets you operating in a state of fear. And when that happens, it's really easy to kind of distract you from the overall mission and vision of connecting with universal law and the universal law of one. Because if we are truly connected and tapped into the universal law of one, we have no enemies and all is one. So even these perceived enemies, even this perceived negativity is just energy, which can be transmuted into true source consciousness. Okay. So that's not to say that there aren't tricks and traps along the way to your spiritual awakening path. There certainly is. So this information being presented is not here to gaslight you into thinking that everything is perfect and there are no obstacles in your way, because there really are some perceived obstacles. But once we start elevating our consciousness out of certain consciousness traps, the way out is a lot easier to find. Okay. A lot of times we can feel trapped into being victims of this really large system that's trying to thwart us at every turn. And I want to address that specifically today, because a lot of that is going to continue to happen as we raise in consciousness, because as we get out of the third dimensional consciousness, what we're going to notice is that we move into this really nebulous fourth dimensional space. The fourth dimension is the astral plane. And I'm not going to say it's all good or all bad, but there's a lot of polarity that exists within the fourth dimension. And there's a lot of tricks and traps and triggers within the fourth dimension. And not moving through the fourth dimension with a spirit of discernment can present some issues. And so I want to really speak to what some of those issues can be. And I just want to say, before I get into the nitty gritty of what you might be navigating during the fourth dimension, during your journey through the fourth dimension, I just want to say that this is not information that is here to make you fearful, make you anxious. And so if there's any time that you hear something that might make you feel like, your heart rate is raising or you're having extra anxiety, just take a moment of pause and tune back in with your breath. A breath that I always like to use is something called the 4-4-4 breath, or box breathing, as other people call it, where you just breathe in for the count of 4. You hold your breath for the count of 4, and then you breathe out of your nose for the count of 4. I'm just going to invite us to do that for 2 more times before we start kind of talking more about the consciousness traps of the astral plane. Breathing in for the count of 4. Holding for the count of 4. And breathing out of your nose for the count of 4. Last time, breathing in for 4. Holding for 4. And breathing out of your nose for 4. So this is an open invitation. If you ever start feeling that those fearful thoughts, going back to your breath, okay? This information is here to inform, just so that we kind of can see things from a more expanded consciousness. But, in order to expand our consciousness, it does mean really having to turn the lights on. And sometimes when you turn the lights on, sometimes you might see some things that you might not want to see, right? And you got to get rid of those things. But before you can get rid of those things, you need to see them, and they need to be unearthed. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about some of the discernment. What do we need to be discerning of? And let's focus in on the astral plane. So I am reading some information from the Ascension Glossary, which is stewarded and curated by Lisa Renee of Energetic Synthesis. I've recommended this source a few times on this channel, and I want to recommend it again because it's a really great compilation of information related to the spiritual awakening process. It's not completely comprehensive. I wouldn't just stick to this one source during your process, but it's a really great tool that I want to direct folks to as they are on this awakening journey right now. So I'm reading from an excerpt from there. It says, the astral plane is the fourth dimension and is referred to as the astral plane or astral dimension of the soul matrix. So when we think about the astral plane, I'm just going to pause from reading for a moment. When we think about the astral plane, let's also just think about the fourth dimension. So think about the number 4. Number 4 is the fourth chakra. The fourth chakra is the heart chakra. The heart chakra is located in our heart space. But something that I have mentioned other times on this channel, and I want to reiterate, is as much as the shift in consciousness is about opening up our heart space, it's not necessarily about opening up our fourth dimensional heart space. It is, but it won't stop there. So we are going through a higher heart chakra activation, which is, the higher heart is located near the thymus gland. That's our 8th chakra. And we can always, whenever we think of chakras, we want to also think of dimensions. The same thing. Whenever we think of astrological houses, we also want to think of we still want to think of dimensions. So for example, the 4th dimension equates to the 4th chakra, which is the heart chakra, which equates to the 4th house in astrology, which is the house of family, which is the house of foundations. Okay. So one thing to know about the astral plane is that there's going to be extreme polarity as it relates to all the things I mentioned. Okay. And so some of these perceived spiritual attacks will happen in all the areas that I just mentioned. So I'm going to repeat them again. So if we're thinking about the 4th dimension, that means that there's some work we need to do with our 4th chakra, which is our heart chakra. So some of these astral attacks could include this whole false twin flame narrative that a lot of light workers and starseeds have to navigate on their journey, or at least encounter on their journey. And if you want to learn more about the false twin flame journey, I do have a video about that. So check that out. And I provide a lot more, a much deeper dive into the false twin flame journey. But that's definitely something that you want to, that's an astral realm situation that you want to be very discerning about. And that's connected with your heart space. Along with that, you have the 4th house in astrology, which is the house of family and the house of our foundations. And so what that means is that a lot of times you're going to see extreme polarity when you're in 4th dimensional consciousness, or when you're engaging with beings on the astral realm, or life from a 4th dimensional perspective. There's going to be extreme polarity as it relates to family upbringing. So that includes navigating karmic family members, navigating karmic attachments within family. That means sometimes feeling as though members of your family are out to get you, members of your family are sent to destroy you in certain ways. And so I'm not necessarily saying that's not true, but what I am inviting folks to do is to think about this from a more expanded perspective. And so if you are interested in learning more about how you might do that, I would recommend checking out the video I did on transcending karma, because a lot of times karma is used as a pain trap to keep us tethered into a lower dimensional reality. And a lot of times that can be our family members and our friends, our loved ones can be utilized to keep us anchored into lower dimensions of reality. However, if you come at this from more of a transcendental perspective of transcending karma, there are ways that you can get out of certain soul contracts, that you can get out of certain karmic cycles with some applied effort and some applied wisdom to ensure that you have the highest octave relationship with your family as possible. And so that means going back, once again, going back towards the law of one, going back to the universal law, divine law, as opposed to the laws of man, as opposed to the laws of the material realm. Okay. And so it does take work, but this will get you out of, this whole idea of being able to transcend karma, even with some of the toughest members of your family. This will get you out of that victim-victimizer program or that extreme duality or polarity consciousness that the fourth dimension can sometimes trap you in as you are awakening. That doesn't mean that you're going to be best friends with all members of your family. A lot of times, starseeds and light workers incarnate into very karmic bloodlines in order to basically be the generational path cutter, right? So this idea of being the one to disrupt the karmic actions of a particular bloodline, the karmic cycles. A lot of times you can feel like you have a target on your back, or you could feel like a lot of members of your family are against you. And maybe that's not going to change all across the board. But what you'll notice is as you take a more transcendent perspective with your relationships, you'll notice that certain relationships will just naturally fizzle out of your life that were karmic in nature. And then others that may have had some karmic attachments that prevented you all from evolving will start to, those karmic attachments will also start to dissipate, and you'll have a much higher octave relationship with a particular family member. So, but in order to do this, it's important to see past the polarity and duality consciousness that the astral realm will present you. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to Ascension Glossary and talk a little bit more about what Ascension Glossary says about the fourth dimension and the astral plane. So basically, trauma, when you're traumatized, so the false matrix operates off of trauma. Okay, so the more trauma that you can accrue, or the more trauma that you accrue, the more likely that you are going to encounter entity attachments, or what is known as negative disincarnates. And I know for me, the first time I became aware of entity attachments, it scared me. It kind of made me feel dirty. It kind of made me feel like, well, how am I going to overcome this? And so first of all, entity attachments are very common, actually. We don't talk about them as much. We're talking about them more and more as a society, especially like in the spiritual community. But, a lot of times this idea of like entities and what we would call demons and all that kind of stuff, it was used to categorize certain people on a negative polarity and say like, oh, if you have an entity attached to you, you must be evil. You must, something must be wrong with you. And in all actuality, the society that we live in has a great deal of trauma. And so I would like to actually find somebody who doesn't have an entity attachment, and that's in order to get to a place where entities are no longer a part of your life at all. It does mean shifting into fifth dimensional consciousness or higher. And that takes a lot of work. And that's not just an individual thing. That's also something that we need to move towards as a collective. Meanwhile, what we'll notice is that people might reach fifth dimensional consciousness or above, but they will be, what we'll be noticing for a while is that we'll be kind of hopping in and out of different dimensions. Because we're multidimensional beings, right? We're not supposed to just stagnate and stay in one particular dimension, but we need to become really comfortable with being travelers and navigators of the different dimensions. Okay. So, you might be in 5D one day or 1 month, but then you also might have a 4D month or a 4D day, or you might have a 3D day. Like really thinking about this more as like you are a traveler, you are a navigator of dimensions in consciousness is really important. And so once you start seeing it from this way, you'll be able to more quickly ascertain what dimension you're in by what's surrounding you and the thoughts that are going through your head and the emotions that you're feeling. And so you'll be a lot more able to navigate and dip and dive out of these consciousnesses at will, and be more of a driver of your ship and your reality. Okay, So, however, the more trauma you have, right, the more trauma that's stored in your body, that's stored in your etheric field, your auric field, the less likely you're going to be able to navigate your own consciousness. And that trauma is going to navigate your consciousness for you. Okay. And so trauma is the name of the game, especially in fourth dimensional consciousness. Okay. So what can happen is the trauma wound will attract an extra dimensional entity or negative disincarnate. And this is according to Ascension Glossary right now, that is vibrating at a particular level at whatever the trauma wound is. So for example, and this trauma could be from this life, but it can also be from other lifetimes too. So you might have a past life where you were murdered, right? And maybe that was like there was a wound that was right around your chest area. You might come into this lifetime with certain wounds and chest pains. And with that being said, that unhealed wound, right? Maybe you didn't heal from the betrayal or the shock of that particular ending of your life. And so an entity attachment will kind of burrow themselves into that space of pain and trauma and hide themselves in that trauma. Okay, so trauma is a great way to hide, was a great way for entities to hide. This is why the more we heal, the more we grow, the more we evolve, the more we kind of close off our auric field from these kinds of interferences. Okay. So say there's a psycho-spiritual event where someone was a child victim of abuse, or at some point in their life, the person underwent some sort of experience of abuse. So if that abuse energy is not forgiven, cleared, and moved through the body, that person probably splintered off and disassociated from that trauma timeline. And a cording or astral binding was now created that connects into that timeline of the event. Okay, so this is where things get really messy and complicated, all right? So this goes back to like cord cutting cords of attachment. And this is really, when we think about energetic hygiene, this is something we want to do very regularly. You want to regularly cut cords of attachment, just even throughout at the end of each day, right? Cutting off cords of attachment with people that you encounter that are not of your highest good. And this isn't done from a place of judgment, but as much as possible, we want to be, in order to ascend, we need to be at a state of 0 point, and being weighed down by traumas or dramas of the past prevent us from being in that 0 point field. Now, on a more severe perspective, back to that example of maybe dying in a past life due to murder, there might be some cording that will result as a result of that past life, and it will carry on into this life. So if forgiveness wasn't or acceptance did not happen for that past life, and it's really difficult for that to happen when we die in a traumatic way, then you might get a soul binding or an astral binding to the same person who murdered you, right? And because you guys have unfinished business, that's going to cause a karmic attachment to come into this life. So it's very likely that that person that you ended things off with on a really bad way will come into your life as a close person in your life. Okay. This is where the whole concept of like karmic family members comes in and that sort of thing. And, I will say sometimes the game is rigged, right? So if you are a light worker or a starseed and you're here with a really big mission to elevate the consciousness on the planet, more things will be orchestrated in your particular hologram to ensure that maybe you magnetize certain traumatic events are magnetized to you, right? But that doesn't mean you don't have power over that. That doesn't mean you're not able to shift that reality, but the awareness that might be something that you're encountering is very important to get ahead of that. Okay, so if you're interested in learning more about kind of how to address this specific energy around like astral binding and cording, I do have a video with a lot more information about soul retrieval and just the 101 of soul retrieval and some ways that you can start initiating your own soul retrieval process. So that's something you want to look at. I also have a video which goes way more in depth on soul contracts, revoking soul contracts as well. Okay, so if you're interested in learning more about some of these, or if some of these buzzwords that I'm bringing out are activating you, there's more content that you can dive into on this channel in order to do this work. Okay. So I'm back to reading Ascension Glossary. So it says here, I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone as a child that has gone through an abuse and their emotional and spiritual development is stunted. The aging process stops at that time of trauma. Even as their biological body ages, their emotional and spiritual body just gets stopped or frozen in time. So this is where soul retrieval comes in. You know, like if there's a part of you that is frozen in time as a result of a particular trauma, then it becomes your responsibility. It doesn't matter how long ago this trauma happened, even if it happened 100,000 years ago. The goal is still for you to retrieve that lost soul fragment. All right. And so that requires a lot of multidimensional travel for that to happen, right? You have to become an adept at this. Okay. And so you really need to start seeing reality outside of a particular trauma that's happening in a moment. So maybe you're going through a traumatic event like right now, whether it's an illness, whether it's a breakup, whether it's a job loss, a financial loss. As an interdimensional traveler, as a person who is here to heal not just yourself, but the collective, then it becomes your responsibility to see the trauma that you're experiencing within any moment, even if it's anxiety or a thought of fear, to see it from a multidimensional lens. Like, what other aspect of myself is this triggering, that may be unhealed, right? And so that's where soul retrieval comes in. Okay, back to Ascension Glossary. That person who suffered that trauma may actually have the emotional development of an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old in that particular issue, because they never healed their inner child from the abuse they suffered from that particular timeline. So this goes back to a lot of folks who come to me and they talk about feeling attacked, feeling like they are being persecuted. I'm not saying that never happened to you, but what I would ask you to do is to really think about what trauma is that triggering? What unhealed trauma is that triggering? Because remember, entity attachments hide in trauma, okay? So once you start addressing that trauma, it's way more likely that you're able to heal that trauma and then also get rid of that entity attachment, okay? So I would say a big part of discerning the astral plane and the fourth dimension is to don't address the entity, right? First, address the trauma first, and the entity will go. Well, the entity will have no place to hide, okay? Moving on. So soul binding or energetic binds are negative energy cords or attachments that are used in a classification of spell casting that are intended to hold back the progress of another person or to suppress the consciousness of another into fear patterns. So satanic ritual binding is a thing. Soul binding is a thing. What they would call, dark magic sorcery or black magic sorcery is a thing in a particular consciousness. Okay. So if you're really feeling these experiences, it's very likely you're in the fourth dimension. Okay. So start seeing yourself. Okay. Maybe if you're not enjoying the experience that you're having, feeling like you're being attacked and curses are being thrown your way and all that kind of stuff, start seeing, well, how can I elevate out of this dimension? How can I elevate and shift my consciousness? And this is always going to mean you going back to 0 point energy, non-duality, polarity integration. I have a video on the universal law of one. If you're like, well, what is the law of one? What is unity consciousness? Check out that video and you can learn more about that. And then I also have a video on polarity integration, where it's actually a meditation where you can really work on balancing out the polarity and duality within your mind. And I'll be sharing more content about that as well. So there is going to be this point where as you elevate in consciousness, especially when you're navigating the fourth dimensional plane, where entities, and also just like the system of the false matrix, they're going to be triggered when they see like, oh, this person's really trying to like exit out of this realm of consciousness, right? They're really trying to evolve, like, and there's going to be like, if you can even just imagine, like a fire alarm will be pulled in the false matrix. And then it'll just be like, you're going to get a whole bunch of like karmic backlash coming your way. You'll come up against what's known as frequency fences, and you'll start seeing all of this stuff kind of like crashing down around you. It's going to look like you're going to feel like you're being punished. You're going to maybe feel like everything in your life is going wrong. You're going to feel like you're a target for just bad luck and bad vibes. Know that that's a part of you triggering the system. Okay. And so taking out, don't take it so personal. Just know that this is a part of your growth process. This is a part of the escape plan, right? So just being aware that this is going to happen. But the more you feed into the duality consciousness, the harder it's going to be for you to exit out of that consciousness. So really getting to 0 point, making sure that you are working to train yourself out of fear. And the energetic synthesis website, there is a core fear removal meditation, and there's a lot of information that Lisa Renee provides on that. I highly suggest it. That's really where you start, is like dissolving the impact that fear has over you. And I'll be doing other content in the months to come about this as well, because it's so important. The more fearful your heart is, the more fearful your mind is, the more stuck you are. Okay. The more paralyzed you are. And I know it can sometimes be easier said than done, but it's a must. There's no getting around it. Alchemizing that fear. Okay. And so all that to say, yeah, there might be some curses that you will need to navigate. There might be some what they might call dark magic that you need to navigate, but it's nothing compared to unity consciousness. The more tapped in you are to unity consciousness, the more of a protective barrier that you create around yourself, because you're able to alchemize all of that energy. Okay. So just when you encounter these really sticky situations, as unpleasant as they will be, please know that this is just, you are encountering a smaller version of reality, that you are encountering a wall, and you need to figure out how to get over that wall, so look at it as an obstacle as opposed to an end, is what I would say as it relates to that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about soul binding entities, which can impact us on the fourth dimension. Okay, so however, a person may not need to be a magician to cast bindings. These are energetic hexes that can be transmitted through sending the negative energy of oppression, hatred, or curses of negativity to another person. Okay, so we can see bindings play out in a lot of different ways. It's not necessarily somebody needing to be wearing a black cloak and to be standing under the moon and casting spells against you and your bloodline. Like, that could be a thing too. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying that, bindings and curses can also be gossip. It could be gossip in that way. It could be just negative thoughts geared towards a certain person. Okay. So, I'm going to talk about a particular soul binding entity known as Malak. Malak is a soul-binding entity and energetic container used in satanic ritual abuse rituals. Many times, Malak is used in the satanic ritual to collect and disperse the human being's vital energies to hierarchies of satanic spirits. When a percentage of the human being's vital forces and spiritual energies are collected by satanic spirits, the person is high risk for soul binding, mental fragmentation, dark manipulation, and possession. Okay, I know that was a mouthful. So with that being said, let's just kind of recap. Number one, entities hide in trauma. So the more unhealed trauma you have, the more houses that you have created for entity attachments, okay? In order to get rid of the entity attachments, you must get rid of the trauma. So address the trauma and you pull out that entity attachment from the root, okay? Trauma can happen in a variety of different ways. You can know that you may be experiencing unhealed trauma in a variety of different ways, whether it's through constant fearful and negative thoughts, lots of anxiousness and anxiety. These are some signs of entity attachments because of unhealed trauma, okay? And I know that I'm not a doctor. I'm just going to put that. I know I'm not a doctor or a psychologist. And I know this goes against what traditional like Western medicine and psychology might say. But that's not the paradigm that I'm operating off of. I'm offering an alternative perspective. So, but that being said, not a doctor, not a psychologist, giving no medical advice. Just giving that disclaimer at this time. So I do have a meditation on healing from Malak bindings and stuff. So if you're interested in learning more about that and how satanic ritual abuse may show up in the family dynamic, click on that meditation. The resources are here is what I want to say. So if this is feeling overwhelming, please know that taking the time out to just educate yourself on these topics and to deprogram your consciousness as it relates to these unseen forces is it's going to be a game changer for you. Okay. So, I want to talk now a little bit about negative disincarnates. Okay. So this is also from Ascension Glossary. So it says negative disincarnates are people that depart from the physical body without any semblance of developing heart-based qualities, or who do not have a light body, or have not made spiritual connections with their soul, or they lived on earth with an extremely selfish, negative perspective of life based only on the material realm, are generally at death of their body, are brought under the hierarchy of control of negative disincarnates, also known as imposter spirits or false angelics. Higher level negative energies control lower level negative energies in the afterlife. This is a form of the consciousness traps that are set in the lifetime of that person to prepare them for servitude in the afterlife, as many disincarnates are not even aware that they are being controlled, living, or passed on. They are set up to be in servitude to dark forces when their spirit body fragments vibrates to exist in the phantom realm. Okay. So this is the whole, there's a whole spiritual hierarchy as it relates to these negative disincarnates on the astral realm. Okay. And so that's really important to know, because there's this whole chain of command. If you think about a corporation in today's, in a traditional third dimensional perspective, and how there's a chain of command at the corporation, or there's a pyramid, right? In terms of who's on top, who's on the bottom. The same can be said in the spirit realm as well. Okay. There are hierarchies of negative disincarnates or negative spirits in phantom or hell realms that use their spiritual energies or their consciousness to be directed for the sole purpose of feeding satanic or demonic energies and entities, many times with the explicit intention of gathering negative energies towards harming a person or harming humanity in general. Many times this harm is generated in order to claim that person at the death process. The extent of harm they are capable to direct to a person or humanity is relative to their force or spiritual strength, the underworld or phantom dimensions from which they exist, and the life force which has been accumulated from the binding or killing of the weaker groups of entities or souls. So essentially, this is energetic vampirism. So we all know energy vampires, right? In the physical realm, whether it's at our jobs or within our families, etc., etc. Well, as above, so below. Okay, this is the same concept, but in the unseen realms. Okay. Many times this harm is I already mentioned that part. Negative spirits, as it is their nature, will reveal themselves to behave in all ways that are parasitic, vampiric, manipulators, and thieves. They deceive and steal in order to cord, attach, and gain energy from their host or target. Their ability to parasitize and control the minds, emotions, soul, or physical body of human beings is heavily dependent on whether their target is spiritually strong and developed, and how pure and energetically balanced their spiritual light body has been built to communicate with the higher self and God forces. This is why we shield. We're always shielding, right? So incorporating some kind of a shielding technique every day. I would say morning and the evening time, okay? Basically connecting to the 12th dimensional shield. You can Google that. There's lots of YouTube videos on that. Lots of my meditations incorporate at least the 12th dimensional shield, sometimes higher. And so really just practicing with that, practicing with your shielding, getting confident and comfortable with that is really essential to make sure that you create a fortress around yourself so that these energies, these parasitic, vampiric energies are not effective in shifting your vibration. So it says, this is why as a light worker, starseed, or indigo, it is important to understand that the first place these negative spirits will attack or manipulate is to interfere with your personal spiritual practice and spiritual devotion. They will try to interfere with all means of direct spiritual communication with one's higher self. Satanic spirits are capable to reverse connections in the neurology to brain receptors to accept pain, abuse, and distortion as familiar and acceptable energies. So this is where, once again, entities don't want us to heal, right? So think about that. Anybody, any person in your life, any institution in your life that is creating blockages, perceived blockages to your healing, know that there's an entity behind that person, that corporation, that collective, whatever that is in your life. Okay. Understand that is because, entities need us to stay in trauma. Okay. So try to detach from just that person and look at this as like the spiritual hierarchy at work. These dark forces will do anything they can to thwart, deceive, or stop the human from accessing any kind of spiritual practice which increases their light source, builds their light body, teaches personal sovereignty, and opens direct communication with one's higher self, avatar self, and the eternal light of God forces. All grid workers and those on earth to represent and support Christos Sophia reclamation, support humanitarian issues, and God forces will be targeted by high-level sorcery and black magicians in order to stop that person or group's spiritual mission. This is why in every case we must never give up our spiritual practices dedicated to serve God or to defer our authority to any negative spirit, archonic deception strategy, or black magician. Lower disincarnates that may also be considered ghost entities or earthbound spirits that were humans from another timeline are the most common spirit attachments for most people. And they are usually generated from that person's ancestral line and ancestral history. Sometimes the ancestor spirit is under the control and servitude of fallen angelics or black magicians and is being forced to cause negativity into the lives of their descendants. Demons will use that person's own ancestors to create harm, or that ancestor has digressed into a demonic state from his or her own negative choices that harmed many other people, living or passed on. The main reason a person, such as an ancestor, has become a negative spirit or demon is that their consciousness was made up of a primary negative quality, a negative vibration at the time of their death from this world. Thus, they were absorbed into the demonic stream. For this and many other reasons, it is important to apply spiritual housekeeping and energetic clearing on behalf of your ancestors, as this issue of genetic path cutting for our ancestors, the mother and father lineages, will show up repeatedly through the ascension process. So just, understanding sometimes it can feel like family is against us, our ancestral lineage is against us if we're working as like light workers and star seeds, but really try to take an expanded perspective with this and consider the fact that, as you liberate these ancestral spirits, even if they're causing all this havoc in your life, the more time and attention that you give towards liberating these entities, the more you free yourself and the more you free your bloodline. Okay, because sometimes it's going to feel like your own bloodline is working against you, but this is because of the spiritual hierarchies that are playing out in the astral, in the lower astral realms. Okay. And so just know that this is a certain level of consciousness that they are trapped in. And as you relieve yourself and liberate them from these consciousness traps, the easier it is to kind of move in and out of higher levels of consciousness at will. Okay. So, this relates to that individual's development of spiritual strength and spiritual devotion in order to deflect and neutralize these kinds of psychic attacks, negative energies, curses, or negative forms, or repel the lower hierarchy of negative spirits that are sent to harass or weaken that person when they are targeted. The primary way that negative spirits gather strong amounts of black force that they use to fuel their black magic directed to harm people is through influencing archonic deception behaviors of producing self-hatred and self-abuse, and with even more harmful methods of blood sacrifice, satanic ritual abuse, which is the intended torture, binding, raping, or killing of another life. They use forms of torturous abuse to capture aspects of the soul into negative spiritual attachments and bindings of servitude for the purpose of gaining more force and strength in order to cast black magic or have control over others. These magicians exist as living entities or disincarnates on other dimensional planes. They are human and non-human, and they desire to exert complete control over others and ultimately to completely enslave other realms of beings. These realms of which they attempt to enslave or bind through various means is not only human, it exists in every realm, such as the elemental, animal, and nature kingdoms of the earth. Negative disincarnates direct harm and negative energy to accomplish their goals through a dark hierarchy of power that is organized like the mafia. Because on Earth, humans have been mind controlled to feel that they are crazy to believe in such things as negative spirits, and few people have developed their higher sensory perception in order to perceive them, these dark entities go unnoticed and unchallenged. Consistent and dedicated spiritual practice is the only way to protect oneself from the many dark forces that exist in the spirit worlds. Some of these dark hierarchies of negative spirits include the most common of disincarnated ghosts, demons, or fallen angelics, naga serpents, goblins or golems, shadow creatures, witch or warlock, and sorcerer or black magician. Black magician or sorcerer levels use shape-shifting and conjuring methods in order to form any kind of dark entity, which is formed from a dark force substance in order to harness subtle forces in the environment. So this is all relating back to like the phantom energies of the false matrix, like this kind of black hole parasitic system that keeps us closed in from experiencing true source consciousness. So when you hear this term black, because I know a lot of times we have this thing of like, is it dark versus light? And if we're in this unity consciousness, it's all one, right? And yet there is a lot of times there are forces that are trying to keep us in this really closed black hole system. And that's kind of what that's how I take on this information. Okay, essentially they gather and steal energy and power from all living things in order to wield control through terrorism. These dark forces impact the general human population in vast amounts, especially now during the ascension cycle, as our ascending planet undergoes the war over consciousness that impacts all living beings. Black magicians and sorcerer types can shapeshift into many forms depending on what their objective may be. Lower negative spirits tend to take generic forms that make up the collective mind of humanity. It is easier to steal a form that is believed in by many people than to create a lesser known form as a totally new form. As an example, many astral negative spirits can easily project Jesus, Mary, angels, or other well-known religious icons into the minds of people. Many of them are tricksters, and their nature is to trick, deceive, and manipulate in order to create harm or confusion, which pleases their dark masters. And so I actually want to wrap up with this final thought. I think I need to make a follow-up to go a little bit more into the ways in which a lot of these lower formed astral entities can transform themselves to or glamorize themselves to look like some religious icons from the age of Pisces, whether that's like Jesus or Mother Mary, etc., Archangel Michael, that kind of stuff. A lot of that is glamour and illusion. And so really seeing spirituality outside of any figures that you grew up on, like any religious figures that you grew up on, is going to be really essential to staying out of the astral traps of the fourth dimension and to utilize discernment. So sometimes I do get people who reach out to me and say that they might feel like they're Jesus reincarnated or Mother Mary reincarnated, that sort of stuff. And a lot of times that is, you got to really ask, like, where is that information coming from? And who wants you to believe that? Because in one of my last videos, I spoke about egregores. So these thought forms that are given life through the power of belief. And so a lot of times these thought forms have been hijacked, even though they may have been originally represented universal love and that sort of stuff. But a lot of times these spiritual and demonic hierarchies will hijack a lot of these religious figures to do their own bidding on the astral realm. Okay. And so moving more into your own sovereignty and your own God consciousness is the name of the game. So instead of looking at these external figures, right, or thinking that you're necessarily like Jesus incarnate, you might have Christ consciousness, and it might be within your calling, right, to spread Christ consciousness into your community or the collective. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're like Jesus Christ embodied. So a lot of times we hear about this stuff and we kind of laugh it off and we're just like, oh, that person is crazy and that and this and that. It's like, actually, no, there are entities that are really trying to throw people off course who have a really high spiritual mission and vision and to falling for these consciousness traps. Okay. So, but just seeing this as a consciousness trap, seeing yourself for connecting more with your higher self and less with any egregore or any sort of thought form that has been distorted through illusions and delusions through the age of Pisces and the age of religion is going to be really important to maintaining your sovereignty as it relates to continuing your spiritual evolution process. Okay. And so only take what resonates, obviously. If you're interested in learning more about some of the services that I provide, if you're looking for a guide or if you're looking for somebody to help you with navigating these dimensions, you can check me out. You can reach out to me. I do offer coaching and consulting as it relates to kind of opening up on your spiritual path. If you found any of this information that resonated with you, or if you found that it helped you in any way, consider sharing it with someone else who might be in need of it as well. And always remember that you ultimately are the key. Until next time, bye.